Good afternoon. My name's Steve Benoit. I'm with Georgian College. Unlike a lot of the other presentations that were quite technical, this presentation is more a customer view of doing IPv6 and how we came to do it. Georgian College is a mid-sized college in Ontario, Canada. We have about 9,500 network jacks, 330 virtualized servers, 3,700 managed computers, and then a number of other unmanaged systems, open wireless systems for the students to connect to. The sites are managed essentially out of our IT, and we have about 45 people in our IT department, and that includes support for our telecom systems, our data, and our end-user client support. So back in February, the NRO held an event to talk about or advertise the last assignment of the IPv4 blocks, and that made the mainstream news. Making the mainstream news was good for us because the CIO came to us and said, "What are our IPv6 plans?" So when he asked that question, I had a couple of answers in mind and chose to take a path of opportunity and decided we would participate in the World IPv6 Day that we've all been talking about this week. With that decision, we had 3 months to get our act together, get something up in IPv6, get it running, and do it across an organization that was already strapped for resources. So what is World IPv6? We've talked about it. It's happened. Everybody's familiar with it. But what was it for Georgian? It was a chance to test IPv6 with the rest of you guys in the world, a chance to look at it, to participate in it, and see how it would or wouldn't work. It was also an opportunity for us within our own college and our department to work across multiple areas and to work on a common, current, and relevant project. It was something neat and new for us to do. It was over and above all the other tasks we had, all our open tickets, all our planned server deployments and everything. It was a net new initiative that we hadn't planned for within this time period. So our basic rough plan was to bring together a small working group of anybody interested within our college, acquire an IPv6 address block from Aaron, check with our ISPs to find out if they could provide IPv6 transport services, enable it on our site from the outside edge inwards instead of the other way around, train our staff on IPv6 and about World IPv6 Day, and then use this experience to help us develop a production plan for the years going forward. So we had a number of contributors to the program. This ranged from all aspects of the IT department, our service desk and level 2 support folks. When something doesn't work, these are the guys that get the call. After they get the call, I get the call that, "Hey, what did you do? What did you break?" So we tried to keep these folks in the loop, let them know what World IPv6 Day was about, what we were trying to do. Server operations folks, these are the guys that build the servers for us within our company or within our college. Interestingly enough, we've been deploying servers with IPv6 stacks enabled, and a lot of the machines actually had linked local addresses. So not only was a stack on, it was enabled, there were linked local addresses on the interfaces. So we had some security concerns around that. Similarly, with our desktop and laptop imaging process, many of our new Mac and Windows 7 clients were being deployed with IPv6 enabled. We'd had a discussion about turning it off. We'd agreed to turn it off. We turned it off. And then we found out with some of the newer features that we needed certain aspects of IPv6 on, so IPv6 was turned back on the images that were being deployed to the faculty and to the desktops within the environment. In the case of the faculty, some of these laptops go home, so they actually had a dual stack capable machine wandering around where they were going to come to a conference like this, they're going home, hotels or whatever, and had IPv6 on as well. So we had some security concerns around that. Our web team helped us with promoting and supporting our marketing group to develop a page link off our main page. This was, after all, an awareness issue. what is IPv6, what's it going to do or not do for us, and get it out within the college community, and what might or might not happen on June 8th. Enterprise system, these are the guys that look after our student portal and our finance system, and we chose to not touch those systems or not involve them. Some of the servers were dual stacked, and we made sure we weren't going to affect that or didn't bring any live V6 towards those areas. Everybody likes to get paid, everybody likes to register students, so we steered clear of that area. The network infrastructure, that's my area. So we did the application with the IPv6 address space. We coordinated our conversations with our service providers. We did our edge router enabling of IPv6 and the firewalls, checked our network tools, enabled IPv6 on the DNS servers, and did our BGP setup sessions. We had a decent little working group of a handful of people, but we said that's not quite good enough. Let's get our computer studies programs folks involved. So these are the guys that are teaching the next round of us. The next guys are going to be sitting out here or standing up here doing the presentation, are going through the college and university system now. So let's make sure they're IPv6 aware and make sure they're capable. So we brought the computer studies folks in and actually carved off a little bit of space for them, said here's an area where we can work and develop for your lab, and they have an IPv6 only lab. Now the one thing we found with them is that the timing was really bad. We were at the end of one academic semester and the start of the next, so resources that were available within a semester were either too busy marking, prepping for the next semester, writing exams, so we didn't have a lot of resources from that area. This is an area over the next few semesters where we will grow that involvement and work with them, and they'll work with us, and we'll move ahead for that. We also went and talked to the web design and animation folks, so these are the web design people, as you can imagine from the name. And again, wrong timing within the semester, but we would like them to be involved in it and help us with the IPv6 only web presence that we're working on. Lastly, we talked to our marketing folks. This was an awareness project. What is IPv6? What might it do? Why are we interested in it? So we talked to them. They helped us with press releases. They issued their own press releases. They promoted it. We got coveted space on the college's production main website, which is hard to get. For the day of, the day before, and the day after, we actually had a link on the main page talking about our participation in a World IPv6 Day. So it was actually quite good for us. They helped us, and they helped the community to understand what we were doing. We then went and looked. We're a small community about an hour north of a reasonably large city, Toronto. So, but we have a lot of other little public institutes around us, the school boards, the hospital, and said, hey, we're doing IPv6, want to come join us? So the tech guys are all interested. Some of the directors and stuff from the other institutes sort of looked at us and said, why are you so interested in IPv6? What's it going to do for you, or what's the advantage? So we're still working with them. We're still promoting IPv6 within those. We have a group of technical folks that meet quarterly, and we'll push that agenda forward. Then we went to our vendors. I narrowed it down to sort of two vendors, Cisco and Microsoft, as two of the bigger vendors that we deal with, and sort of said, hey, we're doing IPv6 Day. In both cases, they knew what it was. The sales folks that I were talking about knew what it was, so that was really good, encouraging. And their response was, how can we help? So I said, geez, you know, I don't know, but let's work on it. So over the course of the project, they helped. They provided materials, links, references, and textbooks and stuff. And as we move into the next phase of our project, I'll start approaching our Cisco rep. Hopefully he's watching right now, and hit him up for some equipment. So we had a project. It was to bring all these different areas together, increase the awareness of IPv6, and actually make something happen in about 3 months. Where did we start? We had our own ASN already. We had a small number of Class C blocks. We had a multi-homed IPv4 BGP internet connections. We had connections to our research network in Canada, that's Canary, and regionally it's Orion, which one of the fellows mentioned yesterday. And then we didn't have any IPv6 internally or externally. Well, sort of. We did have it internally, and we talked about it for a number of years, about turning it off and back on. And then as we got into the project, we found out that V6 was out there on our network and wasn't actually live or in production, wasn't being routed, but the protocol was out when we were watching the network. So we did have it, we just didn't have it set up properly. So where did we start? We went out, started looking at different conferences. We attended CanSec West out in Vancouver, Orion Summit, IPv6 Summit, which was a Canadian IPv6 only summit in Ottawa, Ontario. And then CanHITE was a Canadian Higher Education IT conference, and there was a good IPv6 discussion there as well. So we went out and we started talking to people about IPv6, what they were doing, how could we do it, how did they do it with limited resources. We went out and looked at all kinds of different internet resources. We used our connections with Microsoft and Cisco, looked at the texts, white papers, training material, best practices, things that worked, things that didn't work, talked to our colleagues, and then started looking at our hardware and software documentation. It's surprising what you can find in there when you look at it again. We started looking at staff training. We had a short time frame. We didn't have a lot of time to send folks out. We didn't have a budget for it, so we didn't actually complete any official IPv6 training. A lot of this stuff was self-paced learning, computer-based training, reading initiatives, hours and seconds in a day cobbled together between other projects to get this up and running. A lot of our staff had exposure to IPv6 before. It always gets a mention. You're in Microsoft courses, there's mentions in there about it, and they're tunneling the UAG stuff. There's a number of requirements even in the Cisco CCNA program around IPv6. So our folks had heard about it, but we actually hadn't used it yet. So we set up some test labs. Yes, we did some tunnels as well. It's a good way to test at home. Everybody else has gone to bed and you've got an hour or two to kill. You can bring your tunnel up and do a little more experimenting, test your connectivity. We did some IPv6 only zones within our network. And then we found the Hurricane Electric site very useful, their material, their tunneling, the broker, the whole process. So we spent some time with the Hurricane Electric site. Cisco had a great site on IPv6 transitioning. Their cisco.com/go/IPv6, microsoft.com/IPv6, all useful information. So we did a lot of reading, we did a lot of testing, but we actually had to start doing something. So as soon as we had decided in early March to proceed with the project, we put an application into Aaron for our address block. It's a very simple process. Took me 4 days because I goofed on the org ID on my first attempt. It's probably like a 2-day process. And on March 18th, we had our address, 2620:DD:00/48. So I'm sitting there, what do I do now? I've got an address. Now we actually had to start making stuff happen. So we went back to our idea of going from the outside in. For whatever reason, within my mind, I could envision the project with the least amount of impact for our internal clients if we moved from the outside of the network in. And we started looking at our ISPs. So Orion is our research network connection, which joins us to Canary, and proved to be the easiest one to deal with for IPv6 services. Had a number of discussions with these folks over the last years about a lot of different services. The research guys are a great bunch of guys to deal with. Yep, no problem. We can give you IPv6 transit. They have a good peering arrangement, and that was pretty much a no-brainer. One of our other providers is Cogent. They have IPv6 services as well, so we pursued that way. Our third provider was a community-based network that had been bought out by Rogers, and they're planning IPv6 transit services, and they did have an IPv6 World IPv6 Day initiative. So they were all favorable and interested in participating. So March 25th, we're about 2-3 weeks into the process. and Orion assigns the IPv6 block or address to us, and up comes our IPv6 connection with them. Cogent on March 31st assigns an IPv6 address to us as well, and still hunting and looking around at the Rogers folks, I finally find around the 18th of April, I find the right guy to talk to, find out that I can't get transit services from them just yet, but they're talking about it. So we have to remember that we're changing our production live environment. We've got a change management process. So we actually apply for and receive approval within our change management process to modify our live production environment on the edge, talk to the folks. This is not going to break anything for anybody. It's another protocol, just like, remember the old days when we had IPX or AppleTalk running around on the network, so we used that analogy with them. And we had the approval to go ahead and add IPv6 to our edge services. So we looked at it and said, this is a gargantuan amount of space, addressing space, when you're dealing with NATed addresses internally and a handful of public blocks on the outside. This kind of address space was daunting. So we looked at it and said, we're going to cut this up and we're going to do it 2 or 3 times before we get into a production environment. So we came up with a simple plan and said we've got a lot more reading and planning to do on our addressing layout. So there's a couple of documents we started to look at and quickly decided we're going with a simple approach, let's get this up and running. We then turned to our DNS server, those servers that had been deployed with IPv6 enabled. Luckily this was one. I didn't have to apply for anything other than one change, which was to bind the address that I wanted to the server. It was already dual stack enabled. There was already a linked local address on the desired interface within these servers. We bound the addresses, and we now had an ISC-based bind server serving Quad A records with its own Quad A. So it was pretty quick and easy. I was ecstatic to see that. It was one area that we thought we might have a little bit of trouble with. We created a test domain, did some preliminary work with that, and then we created a record, ipv6.georgiac.on.ca, as one of our IPv6 only servers. So about April 6th, so we're just over a month into the project, and we've got IPv6 up and running. We've got a BGP session with our R&E provider. At that point, we're still working, and to this day, we're still working with our second ISP on some basic IPv6 connectivity. I've got Cisco TAC involved. I've talked to the folks on the Cisco IPv6 transition forum. Everybody's kind of scratching their head, and we're missing something with the one connection to the second provider. The third provider, well, we're still waiting to find out when we can get IPv6 connectivity. Just a quick screenshot. Our link comes up. We link local addresses, some of our internal addresses. But at this point, we've got our connectivity. Our R&E provider is very well peered, and we've got connectivity to the world. BGP session comes up with them. Pretty much a no-brainer as well. We have active BGP sessions with them over v4. Extending it into our IPv6 environment worked pretty easy. The error that you see is our IPv6 challenge with our second provider. So at this point, we've got our external DNS server running. It's serving Quad A records. It's accessible over a Quad A. We have connectivity with our BGP session. We have an IPv6 only web presence. And we have IPv6 address space allocated to our computer studies folks so that they can start doing some testing and experimentation on their own. And our production web server is not dual stacked at this point. Also at this point, we have some internal IPv6 only segments that we're using for our testing, trying to figure out the hows, what ifs, whys, answering the I didn't know you could or how come you can't within our own staff. Even talking about addressing and how the addressing works or how you can concatenate it spawned a lot of different conversations within our department. So we started looking around and saying where were we going next, and what we found out was that for the most part IPv6 was in our equipment already. I had sort of hoped that in my boss sanctioning the IPv6 project that I was going to get a little bit of money out of this to upgrade some equipment. But as we looked around, we found out that, you know, IPv6 was in there already. It got mentioned in a release document years ago that, hey, this does IPv6 now. So IPv6 was in there, went unnoticed. We had no need for it. Now the caveat to that is that we had no need for it. We didn't use it, and it's untested. And as everybody's finding out, there are some challenges with those. But for the most part, a lot of the equipment was already IPv6 capable. Even a couple-year-old F5 load balancer supposedly has IPv6 capabilities, although we haven't tested it on this particular dual setup. Our Cisco ASAs were good. An old PIX that we dragged out of the closet for doing some testing running 6.3 obviously wasn't. All of our new OSs were already being deployed with IPv6 enabled. So as we looked around, we found that it was already there. We just needed to configure it and understand it. Some of the bigger challenges came with our tool sets, our network management tools, spam filtering, and those are going to be where our challenges are. And we haven't really delved into that yet, and that's where we're going in the next year. So May 26th, we bound we dual stack enabled the main production web server, bound IP addresses to it, and then on June 3rd, we published the Quad A record so that we could start doing some of our own testing. Around this time, we had taken receipt of a new Cisco network analysis module, and we thought, hey, what better way to test it than start sticking some NetFlow data from our edge devices towards it, and we were hoping to grab some IPv6 stats off of that, but challenges and resources ensued, and we're still working on that process. So I don't have any fancy graphs on a lot of IPv6 statistics. We're collecting some. We're still analyzing logs. So our publication of our record went out, and on June 8th, we had a success, as did everybody else within the test environment. We had our production web server, www.jordanc.on.ca, up and running. We had our IPv6 only server running, and to this date, both sites are still accessible over IPv6. Given some security challenges, I imagine we'll pull www offline middle of July, do some fixes, and bring it back online afterwards. During June 7th, 8th, and 9th, this was a snapshot of our main website. You can see on the right-hand side, we actually had a link off the main page. Georgian participates in IPv6 Day. This is really coveted real estate. Nobody likes to allocate anything to that, anything like this. So it was quite good for us. It helped promote the colleges, or the college within the community at large, as well as the other community colleges within our system. There's 24 colleges within the Ontario system. Little snapshot from the ISO website saying that yes, we're reachable via IPv4, yes, you're publishing a Quad A for your server, and yes, you're reachable via IPv6. So we had a good success. Did we see any problems? No. During World IPv6 Day time period, we didn't see any calls that were related to IPv6 or that could be attributed to it. So we're happy with that. We had our technical challenges around trying to get NetFlow data, collecting statistics, but from an end user point of view, nobody was impacted by our test or experiment. So that was quite encouraging for us. Future issues. IPv6 is out on our network. There's tunnels out there, and we're pretty much ignoring it within our environment. You design your network for the protocols you know about. In the old days, we had IPX, AppleTalk, and IP. As IPv6 became enabled by default, we didn't pay enough attention to it and are now looking at it and trying to address and make sure that we've secured ourselves, that we've protected it. If you're running newer equipment, you can build things into your security approach like RA Guard, but if you don't know about it and you don't turn it on, you have some challenges. So we want to enable and control IPv6. We need to know about it. We need to consider what impact it may or may not have on our VoIP system. We want to look at promoting student training within our labs on IPv6, testing our network management tools as we roll it out and try and control it. I'm sure we'll have challenges with our tools. We use a mixture of commercial and open source tools, so there'll be upgrades to be had there. Performance testing, some of the IPv4 stuff is done in the silicon. Is it that way for the IPv6? Are there going to be any challenges from a performance standpoint? It won't be for the first little while. We'll have two protocols. One will be preferred. But when we get into an IPv6 only environment, what are we going to have? What kind of upgrades are we going to have with our system? Future issues, tunneling, tunnel brokers. One of our big goals is to help promote IPv6 readiness within our community, train our staff, and build connectivity into our purchasing requirements. One of the hot topics is always around security and NAT and the lack of NAT within IPv6 and people's notion that NAT is security when it really isn't. Project timeline, it was way too short, and in the end users don't really care about IPv4 or v6. They just want to browse the internet. It helps with us to justify our projects, but in the end, they really don't care. So in the end, we're more aware of IPv6 than we had been. We've created a team of folks within our area that is interested and engaged in moving the project forward, and we can now start planning our IPv6 environment. All I can say is start now and start early with your migration from a customer standpoint, and thanks from a customer's point of view. Thanks for providing the transport services and the connectivity. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for some questions. Anybody with some questions? In that case, I got a couple of questions for you. If we didn't have IPv6 Day, do you think your CIO would have given you the permission to do all this work in a 3-month period?
Absolutely not. It was strictly based on that, on the IPv4 depletion height, and that was our sort of goal. We were taking advantage of it to do that.
So even though from like a lot of people at NANOG, our perception is that it was a non-event day, but from your perspective, it was a useful tool to get work done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anton.
Tamika Pella, 5 Nines Data. Hey Steve, so question for you is from your perspective coming into this with the gear you had, did you see anything interesting from the control plane side, like control plane policing, stuff from a security perspective, network level, layer 2, layer 3 stuff to keep things working when someone loops a cable, that kind of stuff?
Not yet. We haven't had a chance to really analyze our data, and I'm not sure we had enough traffic to do that, and that's where I want to go next. Part of our reason for involving our computer studies folks is that I want to have them work with us to generate enough traffic and enough statistics and collect that information to move forward. I'm ecstatic that we got the project done, that we actually had a presence. I was hoping to collect more statistics during that and have some analyzed in the time frame, but the resources just aren't there. So we're moving forward for that very reason.
Well, in a few more nanogs, I can hope to see something about that. I would definitely invite you to look at new things that are arriving on the control plane. If you can monitor specifically CPU received packets compared to your V4 stuff, that'd be interesting to see another large campus network with some sort of telemetry data on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next.
Yeah, I'm Adrian Brown, level 3, speaking for myself mostly. I just wanted to sort of, by show of hands, ask everybody in the room to either put their hand up if their company participated in V6 Day from a Quad A publication perspective or from a dual stack transit perspective. Excellent. And then keep your hand up if you guys or if your company has left the Quad A record in place after IPv6 Day.
So for the viewing audience, a lot of hands went up in the audience.
Yeah. I'm going to say about a third left them on, I think, from what I could look at here.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right, about a third. Thank you.
Okay. So I encourage anybody who wants to ask more questions, you know, the Steve out during the break. And now we're moving towards our break. and we'd like to thank XKL for sponsoring the break. And then we're moving towards ARDM is going to be in this room. And if people don't know what ARDM, that's address resolution for massive numbers of hosts in the data center. And then up in the mezzanine area in the silver room, we have the peer and BOF. So those would be our next 2 sessions. And then, of course, the NOG lab is open. So if you haven't visited a NOG lab, we encourage people to visit a NOG lab. And thank you very much, and enjoy your break.